The following is taken from a radio testimony of one of the victims, Zal Orlikow.
I can't get over the rage that I feel that he would have done this to me and to other people.
In 1957, Zal Orlikow was suffering from depression. It was recommended that she see Dr. Cameron, who was one of the leading psychiatrists in Canada. However, her treatment from Dr. Cameron consisted of massive doses of lysergic acid diethylamide, a new experimental mind-altering drug called LSD. It destroyed her mental health.
They took away the remaining years of my life. They really wrung them out and left me with just a piece of rag to live. And that's not good enough. That's just not good enough. And it's not good enough for me, and it's not good enough for anybody else. And as long as I can open my mouth, as long as I can fight, I'm going to fight.
Little did Zal know that this nightmare went deeper, all the way into the heart of the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. From 1953 to 1964, the United States government carried out Project MK-Ultra, a series of mind control experiments tested on both the general public and government officials alike. The experiment was conducted by the CIA after they suspected the Soviet Union was brainwashing American prisoners of war and turning them to communists using a method they called brain warfare. During this time, communication was intentionally abused in two ways by the CIA. First, with the spread of propaganda about forced communism onto Americans, which caused mass hysteria. And secondly, with the array of experiments conducted on the public without their knowledge. This all resulted in numerous deaths at the hands of the CIA, as well as generations of trauma from survivors and their families. Through brainwashing these individuals, the government hoped to find a new way to pull information from their subjects. The main question at the time seemed to be, was there a pill to make a man give away his secrets and then forget that he revealed them? The ultimate goal for MK-Ultra was to obtain a new form of mind control, a way to coax private information out of people without their knowledge. This project stands as an example of one of the most immoral and dangerous things that the government secretly did to the public, showing how they went to intense and outlandish lengths to gain knowledge against other countries and even their own people. Project MK-Ultra was a torturous experiment in an attempt to gain power. And this level of non-consensual human experimentation at such drastic levels serves as a prevalent example of the lack of communication between a government and its people. In 1953, the growing fear of communism after the Second World War was heavy on the minds of U.S. citizens. The Korean War, one of the battles of the Cold War to fight communism, had just ended. American prisoners of war were being sent back, and reportedly were parroting communist propaganda. Allen Dulles, the newly appointed director of the CIA, made a speech to the public about this on March 20th, 1964, commenting on the brain warfare and ultimately causing a break of mass hysteria to ripple through America. In an attempt to gain the upper hand in the Korean War, the government ultimately made the decision to launch a series of experiments that would test an assortment of psychedelic drugs, paralytics, and electroshock therapies on citizens unknowingly. This project functioned under the name MK-Ultra.
3 days after Allen Dulles' speech, he approved Project MK-Ultra, which started as a series of testing plans originally created by chemist Sidney Gottlieb. These tests would include an array of test subjects pulled from varied backgrounds. Foreigners from detention camps in places like Japan, Germany, and the Philippines were pulled, and research was also conducted in universities and treatment centers in America and Canada. Those who were tested on were often manipulated into compliance or given a special deal in exchange for their participation. For example, when testing on prison inmates, the CIA told them that if they participated, they could get extended recreational time or commuted sentences. On top of this, many of the experiments were organized so people were unaware that they were subjects to begin with. Images show patients in an unconscious state in the hospital being experimented on. Lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD, was the most common drug used, since it was suspected by the CIA that this was the main brainwashing substance. With new discoveries of mind-altering drugs, government officials would oftentimes discreetly get their coworkers workers to consume LSD in their food or drink, and while it was seen as a harmless prank by the majority, the joke eventually went too far. Frank Olson, an American bacteriologist working at the United States Army Biological Warfare Laboratories, was working on a project with the team, drank a cocktail spiked with LSD during a retreat in November 1953. The drug administered a heavier effect than expected, and a few days after taking it, Olson was found after having fallen from a high story of a hotel in an alleged suicide. Olson's family was skeptical of this story since after looking at the autopsy, they found that he had sustained some injuries before the fall and that LSD was in his system at the time of his death. Multiple theories arose on how he died. People have asked, did he know too much? Was this what ultimately led to his death? Although there was a brief consideration about whether to inform the public about their experiments or not, the CIA ultimately decided against it. Quote, precautions must be taken not only to protect these operations from exposure to enemy forces, but also to conceal these activities from the American public in general, end quote, wrote the CIA's Inspector General Christopher Sharpley in 1957. Quote, the knowledge that the agency is engaging in unethical and illicit activities would have serious repercussions in political and diplomatic circles and would be detrimental to the accomplishment of its mission, end quote. Though no information on the testing was communicated to the public, brainwashing propaganda concerning the Soviet Union turning Americans into communists was still heavily manufactured and released. As time went on, officials found themselves unsatisfied with the amount of information they had collected and decided it was time to ramp things up in their experiments. In 1955, the government now had a newly developed idea for a procedure they wanted to run. The man hired to be in charge of this new operation was George White. Originally on the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, White was about to conduct one of the most important and unsettling tests yet. He was hired to set up a special room that served as a makeshift brothel. A panel of two-way glass was installed in the room as a mock mirror, and men were lured away from bars and even off the streets by hired prostitutes, where they would be drugged and then observed by White and his team. Quote, I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun, 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 while later said, where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, cheat, steal, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest, end quote. White bribed prostitutes into doing the experiment by telling them that if they made a run-in with the law later, he would make sure nothing bad happened to them. They just had to follow through with everything he instructed them to do.
After years of research, MKUltra finally met its downfall in 1963. Investigator John Vance was hired to check up on strange activities that he had been hearing about. MKUltra directors tried desperately to convince the CIA's audit board that what was going on was fair play, but they were instead urged to conduct more honest and humane experiments in the future. However, Congress met some roadblocks when they went to question some ex-CIA members about what had been going on. Alan Dulles told workers it would be a good idea if the MKUltra files were destroyed. Those who used to work for the CIA claimed that they could not remember anything about government testing. This meant that communication was not only limited between the CIA and the people, but the rest of the government as well. The small bits of information they were able to scrape up, however, were not released to the public until 1975. Many of MKUltra's records were destroyed in the 1973 purge, and many had been destroyed throughout the program as a matter of course. So in short, nobody knows exactly how many lives were lost due to MKUltra, with many victims sadly taking their own lives after experimentation. After finding out about the project, John Vance, a member of the CIA Inspector General's staff, implemented new research ethics and guidelines and brought the programs on non-consenting volunteers to an end. 2 lawsuits went to the Supreme Court at this time, but both allegedly protected government over citizens' rights. 5 years after experimentation, LSD was outlawed in the United States, but many argue that it led to more widespread recreational use of drugs as well, due to more information being discovered because of research. On top of the ban of LSD, MKUltra resulted in an uptick of modern-day conspiracy theories, with the name MKUltra being given an entirely new meaning in films, online forums and channels, and even in reference to odd behavior exhibited by celebrities. So while the name MKUltra stayed alive, the concealment of much of its information has made it into more of an online trend than anything else, while still leaving many of the families that went through it at the time with irreversible trauma. This project stands as an example of one of the most immoral and dangerous things that the government secretly did to the public, showing how they went to intense and outlandish lengths to gain knowledge against other countries and even their own people. Well, when I read about it in the paper, the one thing that lessened considerably was the guilt.
I didn't feel so guilty anymore. I felt it wasn't all my fault. Thank God it's not all my fault because, it's a terrible thing for people to put up with someone, who has sometimes a quarter of a life, sometimes a half life.